This is the Iron Sharpens Iron movement, sharing insights into the power of people-centric leading.
Hi, this is Jim, and today we welcome to our tribe a leader in the design and implementation of leadership systems. He describes in his new book that great leadership becomes a system of leadership that creates a great experience for the workforce. This will change the way that you think of organizational leadership. And this is Dan Edds. Iron Sharpens Iron movement is brought to you by N2 Growth, a leader in executive search, leadership development, and talent management. We find and develop the world's best leaders. Learn more about our practice by visiting us at n2growth.com or click on the link in the show notes of this podcast. Dan, welcome to the Iron Sharpens Iron movement. Our tribe of listeners are teed up and got their listening ears on for someone like you to spend time with us today. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Jim. I really do appreciate this opportunity to be with you.
You know, Dan, we've spent some time talking and just kind of figuring out some of the topics that we want to do for this podcast. And it's kind of funny to the audience out there. Dan and I have hit it off pretty well. We had a discovery call the other day and even talking in the green room today. I'm not so sure, Dan, there's just one specific thing that I want to talk to you about. You are such an expert in the field of leadership. It's amazing. But I will tell you, your point of view is something that's very unique, and I just can't wait to get into really the topic of your new book.
Well, thank you. It's 4 years in the making, so I could talk all day and several days without stopping.
Well, I imagine we're going to talk about this, but 4 years is quite the journey, and I wonder how many different versions you've gone through and to finally get it across the finish line.
More versions than I care to count, let alone even being able to count.
Well, before we get into it, let me ask you that. That'd be fun to know. I mean, was there an original point of view that you had going in 4 years ago that like drastically changed, or did you just really kind of refine it? Was it just small little lefts and rights and not drastic 90-degree turns?
Great question. So I started out the journey really after working with a small rural healthcare organization. And they had asked me to help them design a model of leadership or a system of leadership. Actually, they used the word model. And I said, well, that's great. But in my worldview, I think leadership is more about a system. And if that's what you want to do, that's great. And the CEO said, that's exactly what I want to do. And then I walked out the door and no joke, I said to myself, now, how in the heck am I going to do that?
I used the right words, but now what?
Yeah, now what? Yeah. And the reality was, I had been toying with this idea that organizational leadership really is a system. I had just been kind of thinking about it. After doing this project, though, I walked away from that project with the really almost a conviction that leadership really needs to be understood organizationally as a system. But I didn't really know what a system looked like. And if I saw one walking, I mean, I'd helped this organization create one, but if I saw one walking down the street, I still wasn't sure, if I knew what I would be looking for. And and so then I got, researching and reading, and am I the only person on the planet that's thinking about this? And
It's kind of funny though, Dan, like when you even say systems, right? Leadership as viewed from a systems kind of theory and system thing. Don't you find that a little controversial, or don't people push back on you almost instantly? Or is it just me? Because, like most people I would imagine when they say, leadership as a system, most people are like, no, it's leadership as a person or a personality. It's all about the human. What's your counter to that?
Well, great question. And actually, there's a couple. One is it seems to be a generational thing.
Huh.
So people, let's say from 50 and up, they ask me that kind of a question. They say, well, is this leadership by the numbers? And oh no, you can't be telling people how to lead, but because people have to have their own flexibility and they have to bring their own creativity and da 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 da, and therefore leadership really is about my leadership and your leadership, etc. However, if I'm talking to a millennial, someone who is like 40-ish, maybe 45 in that range and younger, they seem to get it, and for reasons I can't say I understand, but they almost immediately say, "Oh, you're taking personality out of the out of the requirement for a leader." And I say, "Yeah," and they say, "I like that idea." And why there's this generational thing, I don't know, but do think millennials are way smarter than us anyway.
Well, that's a known fact. That's a true fact for sure. So, I introduced the name of your book during the read-in, but the genetics of leadership. One, I want to come back to that and figure out why you named it genetics of leadership. Uh, but two, cracking the code of sustainable team performance. And when I read that sustainable team performance, you're really focusing on that high performing organization and how they consistently perform at those elite levels. So when we get into this conversation, Dan, and you're like systems, and I'm pushing back on you on no humans and numbers and all that stuff. These are things that you have taken the time in this 4-year journey to really unpack and realize high performing organizations do operate in this kind of systems theory. You just took the time to tell us what all this means.
Yeah, and in fact, that's what I really started. I mean, I started out the whole journey saying, okay, how do high performing organizations and teams, how do they approach leadership? And I mean, I kind of thought that there might be a systemic approach um, to it. I wasn't sure. And I started out looking at healthcare because, I had been working with this healthcare organization, and then began to realize that no, the same principles are working in manufacturing. And then I ran into an educator who took a elementary school from failing to a massive success in just a few years. I saw her do this exact same thing. Um, and the more I looked and the more I found organizations that really perform consistently over a long period of time, not for a year or two or even three, but 4, 5, 6, 8, 10, 12, 15, 20 years, even across multiple generations of changes in leadership, every one of them understood and approached leadership in a very systemic way, even though a lot of them didn't realize what they were doing.
Ha. So this is cross industry, cross generational. Doesn't matter if it's private or public. And let me ask you this one too. How about cross cultural? Did you look into that at all too? Does this cross over into different cultures?
Interesting question. I am confident that it does. From this standpoint, one of the organizations that I did a fair bit of research on, it's a small manufacturing company. They design and manufacture high-end commercial furniture. They do some retail as well, residential as well. They have a workforce that is an ethnic melting pot. You walk into their big lunch area, cafeteria area, and it smells like an international food bazaar.
Nice.
Yeah,
Send me there.
right, right, and you meet them, you take a tour, and you realize pretty quickly there's people that work in this organization from all over the world. It's a place where people who are new to the country, they can be assimilated into the culture of the organization very quickly. Um, and from everything I could tell, they love working there. I saw, you know, Caucasians, I saw Asians, all the different races working together in a highly collaborative fashion. And so I think it easily transfers cross culturally because the principles are human. Um,
Yep.
and I've never even thought about it until I'm saying this right now. The principles of are human, as opposed to um, some kind of strict organizational um, mindset that's maybe not so human.
So would you draw that distinction on, let's say, in the 80s, when a lot of the manufacturing here in the US was trying to copy the Japanese system of manufacturing, and how they were doing it there? Was that kind of robotic and non-human in nature? And then what you have discovered in your research in the last few years is the human side of this systems theory?
Um, uh, well, it's interesting. A lot of organizations adopted Lean or Kaizen or the Toyota production system. And what I think we've found out is it's one thing to adopt the production system, it's another thing to adopt the management system. And
Okay.
and actually, the management system, funny enough, is actually defined as a system of leadership. Um, But you think about it. One of the case studies in the book is with a large healthcare organization, nearly 10,000 employees. They were the first healthcare organization to adopt the Toyota production system for the way they would deliver healthcare. And if you just and today they're the world's leader. They teach lean all over the world to healthcare organizations, and if you just looked at the emphasis on lean and their lean training, you'd only be getting half the story. The other half of the story is their management system, which they actually define as a system of leadership. But it starts with a core value or a cultural mandate or the outcome of or a purpose. The purpose of their leadership is all focused on respect for the worker, respect for the patient, and respect for the work. Now, if you think about it, is there a culture in the world that doesn't want to be respected?
No,
Yeah, it's a basic human
that's right.
thing that
Exactly correct.
we all want to receive value and respect. And so in that sense, it transcends any and all cultures.
That's true. I mean, it is, one of the things that we focus on here is trying to talk about human centric leading, and human centered value. And there's no doubt that one of those core, almost primal traits with humans is that respect and recognition. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah. Well, the one, I mean, there were all kinds of, major ahas in doing the research. Um, but one of the first ones was that high performing organizations really start with a transcendent value, which the word sort of makes me nervous. I mean, transcendence, it gets a little too squishy for my taste.
Mm-hmm.
Until you realize that the word can mean extraordinary. And when you tie that to the way these organizations approach this transcendent purpose for leadership, it always, and I would emphasize always, always includes a strong component of the experience of the workforce. So, healthcare organization I just mentioned, you go to work for them and you can expect to feel respected. The manufacturing company I mentioned, um, they focus on servant leadership, and at the same time, they will talk about extracting waste from their manufacturing processes. So, if you go to work there, you can expect to know and feel that your supervisors are servant leaders. In fact, they've even changed the traditional names. They don't use the word, boss or manager or production lead. They're all mentors because it
Oh, wow.
because
Okay.
the word mentor is a better description of the relationship of a servant leader to those they are trying to serve. You're a leader in that organization. Your number one job is to mentor your workforce to find and eliminate waste in the production processes.
So Dan, when you're help me figure out your primary focus of the book when it comes to what we just talked about. Or have you examined what right looks like and you're merely just saying, here's the playbook, folks. Here is what right looks like. These are high performing organizations that have a proven track record past your criteria on what you define for time to be proven that they're high performing. And these are kind of the trends that made them successful? Or are you trying to say if you just slow down organization X and start to implement these kind of things, you too can become high performing? And these are the things that, from a systems perspective, must be in place or should be in place to find that sense of success. Because where I'm going with this, Dan, is for my third question to you, and you're going to have to answer all those other twos that I just sent you. That is, you know, a lot of the stuff sounds familiar. It sounds like, well, creating a value, right? Or showing what we expect to happen. But that execution side, it just seems like very few people execute.
Yep, yep. Well, the first thing I would say is what I found is that there's no such thing as one size fits all. So here's a terrific example. So one of my interviews was with actually two of my interviews was with two senior U.S. Army officers. One was just getting to ready to retire, a 34-year veteran, U.S. a full colonel, Special Forces, U.S. Army Ranger, the whole 9 yards.
Nice.
Um, and when I asked him about how the Army approaches leadership, he immediately said, "We practice servant leadership." And then he started talking to me about love. And I was like, wait a minute, servant leader servant leadership I get, but love?
Right?
Um, and to be totally honest, I somewhat discounted his ideas because he spent most of his time in the chaplaincy. I thought,
Okay.
yeah, okay, that
Okay.
it fits. That sort of fits with the chaplain. Come forward a year later, I'm having a interview with a guy named General Barry McCaffrey.
No
General,
small name there.
no small
Yes.
name. He is today a paid NBC News consultant for issues of national security. Held a cabinet position in the Clinton administration. He retired from the Army after 32 years, 4-star general. He holds 3 Purple Hearts. And you read this guy's resume, and I don't know 10 men who have accomplished what this guy has accomplished in one life.
Mm.
And when I asked him, if there was one or two words that you would use to describe the Army's approach to servant leadership, he immediately said, "We practice servant leadership." And the very next breath, he's talking to me about love.
Ha. Well, what do you know?
Yeah, and then he's telling me a story about his relationship with Norman Schwarzkopf during the first Gulf War. And his actually, I didn't even hear him say this until I was reading the transcript, and then I read it, and I thought, I didn't hear that, but it's right in front of me. He said, in exact words, Schwarzkopf actually loved me.
Wow.
Now, that's, servant leadership, love, taking care of one another, taking care of your buddies. That's going to be different in the United States Army than it is
Hmm.
going to be, let's say, in an elementary school.
Yes, it is.
Okay. So,
Yes, it is.
I'm sitting down with the principal of this elementary school. And I said, I want to ask her about her approach to leadership. And she says, leadership? I don't know anything about leadership. And she went on to design the most eloquent system of leadership I found outside the United States Army. And when I said, so if there are one or two words that you would describe your approach to leadership, what would they be? And she, without blinking, she said, well, this isn't going to be very popular, but love and grace. And
Wow.
again, I thought, okay. And I'm thinking, this is exactly what I'm thinking. There's 450 elementary school kids streaming in the doors of this school. It's almost the last day of school before summer recess. And I sort of liked the idea that they had a principal that loved them. I mean, it's just sort of, you know,
Sure.
fit. And she
Every
read,
parent would hope that.
every parent would hope that, and she read my mind. She said, "That's not how I'm using. That's not how I'm using those words." She says, "I'm using those words because when I need to have a difficult conversation, they remind me that I could have that conversation in a spirit of love." And she said, "They remind me that I can push my staff. I can hold my staff accountable and hold myself accountable, but do it in a spirit of love."
Wow.
Now, at the end of this conversation, she hadn't yet used the word grace, and she hadn't mentioned anything about innovation. And she had everything she was telling me was almost a check off list of a system of leadership, but she hadn't mentioned anything yet about innovation. So finally, we're almost done. And I said, okay, you've talked about love, you've talked about collaboration, you haven't yet used the word grace. And no kidding, this is what she did. She pulls down the sleeve of her blouse and she shows me the word grace that she has tattooed on her wrist.
Oh my goodness.
And she says, "This is how we do innovation." Now,
Are you writing that in your book as you're
yeah,
taking the notes?
I,
Can I take a picture? What's
well, fortunately, I was recording it. Now, I would, in fact, when I walked out the door, I said, by the way, don't be embarrassed to use the words love and grace, because I had, a four-star general and a full U.S. Army colonel use almost the same words to describe the Army's approach to leadership. Now, the way the Army approaches servant leadership and the way this principle approached leadership from the standpoint of love and grace, they both had very similar starting points, but they ended up in very different places. The school, their focus was on collaboration as the key to academic achievement. And the Army has a different focus. They have different rules and routines and behaviors, but they both started from very similar places. So it's not a one size fits all.
So, how do you if when you're forming this book, and if it's not a one side, like a lot of books are, this is how you tie a shoe, this is how you build a house, this is how, I want to buy the book to get from A to Z. Show me how to do this, Dan. And if you're opening up the book and go, there's no one size fits all.
Yeah. Well, as it turns out, though, systems, and this is, this gets into the technical part, but systems all have the same structure. Um, a system has, in fact, this is the classical definition of a system. A system has a small handful of core elements or parts, what I'm choosing to call resources. Those resources interact in very specific ways to produce a purpose. So, if you think about DNA, and one of the reasons why I'm using DNA as the metaphor is because DNA is made up of phosphate and sugar, two elements found in every household kitchen.
True.
Y- Yet the way those elements interact at a molecular level forms the very foundation of life, all biological life. So, one of the attributes of a system is that a system always, underline always, um, produces more than the sum of its parts. And what I say in the book is a system will take 1 plus 1 and create 10.
Ha.
So,
Okay.
the model that I discovered was Every organization has three key resources: people, money, and knowledge. And if you want to tie technology and plant and equipment in there with money, that would be fine with me. And so every organization has those three resources. Those resources produce a purpose or produce something through rules, routines, and behaviors. And you could, if you want to tie values into behaviors, it's really values and behaviors. Um, and so, what high performing organizations do is they say, well, where do we want? What's the end result? And that end result is really the experience of the workforce, and it's different. So, um, healthcare organization, they start out with a result or a purpose of respect. Another healthcare organization up in Anchorage, Alaska, it's a Native American healthcare organization. They start out everything with a value of relationship. Now, you could say that respect and relationship takes them to the exact same place, and I wouldn't necessarily disagree. But culturally, relationship is tied to Native American cultures like hand and glove.
Mm. Yes, true.
And so that's where they start. And it's meaningful and impactful to them. Um, I had another, my friend Brian, who is a brilliant civil engineer, works for one of the largest engineering firms in the world. When he was identified as one of 300 emerging leaders, yeah, and when he's telling me the story, I said, "Let me guess. When they placed this title on you, they sent you off to leadership development school for a month to teach you how to lead." And he said, "No, they gave me nothing." I said, "What'd you do?" He said, "Well, I read a few books, and he said, I'm also a man of faith, so I studied what Jesus said about leadership." I said, "So what'd you conclude?" He said, "I concluded that leadership is a relational enterprise." It's exactly what he said.
Wow.
So
Yep.
he then went about and he designed a system, just like he was, designing a wastewater treatment plant. He designed a system of leadership that would produce relationship.
So I want to kind of rewind the tapes here a little bit, Dan, and I want to make sure something that I wrote down is I heard it correctly, and I really want to dive into it a little bit. You said that as these high performing organizations start to focus and dig down, they focus on the end result is the experience of the workforce. So you're telling me that it's about the experience of the employee that makes the difference?
Yep.
Okay. So
Now I might.
unpack that a little bit more for me.
Okay. Okay. All right. So this manufacturing company I referenced. So at the end of my tour with them, there was a small group of us were sitting around, and I said, "Is there any overarching, overriding philosophy, principle, output, purpose of your leadership?" And Todd, the production manager, gets up out of his chair. He's kind of a big guy, walks over in front of me, bends down, looking at me. His body language was startling, and he said, "We practice servant leadership." I said,
Mm.
"Okay." But it really doesn't stop there. It's servant leadership for the purpose of engaging their workforce to find and eliminate waste. So the way I describe that is, if you think about a DNA molecule and the double helix, one side of their double helix is servant leadership, and the other side is engaging their workforce. Um, and so, servant leader, I mean, engaging their workforce, say that's the practical part, but servant leadership is what the workforce is going to experience.
Wow. And this is a common thread that you have seen.
Yep. Time and time and time again.
So here's the danger point that's flashing through my head. So I'm a huge servant leader. It's what I practice, what I preach, it's what I grew up with for 30 years in the military, all those kind of things. But it's that other side of the helix, this engaged employee, this engaged workforce. Isn't there in today's world, this massive disconnect on employee engagement?
Well, great question. And in reality, yes. I mean, if you look at the latest Gallup numbers, if my math is correct, 66% of the workforce is either disengaged or, excuse me, non engaged, which means they show up, they do their job, they collect their paycheck and go home, or they're actively sabotaging their workplace. On the other, yeah, on the other hand, high performing organizations, those numbers are literally reversed. In the highest performing organizations, 70% of the workforce is actively engaged, meaning they're given the best of themselves to their organization. They're actively participating in innovation and creating discretionary customer value, and they want to be there. And they're enjoying being there. They are intellectually and emotionally and psychologically engaged with their work.
And is it your theory that that high level of employee engagement is because it is the experience that the employee is having every day around their work environment,
Yes,
which is produced because of this systems thinking?
yes, exactly. So
Now
common
I'm
wi
connecting the dots, Dan.
Yeah,
Now I'm
yeah.
connecting the dots.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, you're doing good. Yeah, so conventional wisdom says, well, a great leader inspires his or her staff. They're an inspirational leader, and they're trying to capture the imagination of the workforce, and all of that is wonderful, and all of it is great. What I found though is that these organizations don't rely on inspiration because if you think about it, inspiration is really fleeting, and we can get inspired. This school, elementary school I referenced. Teachers going to teaching because they're inspired by the mission of education. Yet right now they're all exhausted. Um, and I've got one in my home, and she's tired,
Ha.
and at some point, we all have to get down to just doing the work of designing and developing and delivering great products and services. And what I found is that it's not the inspiration of the mission that keeps people coming back to work every day and enjoying coming to work every day and giving themselves the best of themselves to their employers every day. It's the experience. It's what they experience when they walk in that door. So this manufacturing company, I took their tour, and I got to their offices maybe like 20 minutes early, and I'm sipping my morning latte, and I'm watching people come in the door, and it was at first I didn't think too much about it, but pretty soon I realized they're all smiling. It was odd. It was so obvious. It was odd. And then you take in the tour, and people are making eye contact with you and smiling at you. And
Ha.
and it was, I mean, it sounds simple enough, but at one point it was like, this is just different. And I've got 25 years in as a consultant. I walked into lots and lots and lots of different organizations. I've never walked into an organization where everybody is smiling and greeting you.
Yeah, it almost feels like that was a Hollywood set.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But what I found is when you start with with the employee experience, that is what ultimately will drive the relationship to the customer.
Yeah,
I mean, don't we, how many people have said, treat your people the same way you want them to treat your customer?
that's right.
So
That's right.
that's exactly what these high performing organizations that I looked at, it's exactly what they did. And they started out with a system of leadership that said, this is, if you're a leader in this organization, here's how you do it. Here's the experience that we want you to focus on in providing our workforce.
It's so eye opening to me, Dan. It's really interesting. Yeah, I was reminiscing as you were talking about about a year ago. I went to South Africa and I was a part of the Employee Engagement Awards, which is an international organization, but it was the Employee Engagement Awards for the continent of Africa, and it happened to be conducted down in Johannesburg. And I was there visiting our partners, and I was able to participate in that awards banquet. And what was amazing was it was the focus on the organizations, right, that got employee engagement right. And that's one thing. And, 1 year ago, Jim Hotailing would be like, yeah, okay, they're taking care of their people great. But on reflection of this conversation that we're having right now, Dan, what I what I'm rewinding in my head is every last one of those organizations were, guess what? A high performing organization. These were all it wasn't like they gave an employee engagement award to a subpar organization. The head organization wasn't subpar. They were all operating at this fantastic level. And this is the core foundation building block is this employee experience, the engagement, the feeling that they have. It's truly a building block. It's almost like it's DNA.
Yeah. Well, and the crazy thing is we talk about all the time about organizational DNA, but what is that and what does it look like and how do I design it and create it? And sort of common sense would say, well, we can't design our own DNA. Well, and organizationally we do. Um, and these high performing organizations, from my research, they design it. Again, they may not realize they're designing a system, but they figured out how to design their DNA so every manager, every leader knows exactly what to do and not to do to engage their workforce.
So, Dan, one of the things that I'd like to push you a little bit harder on too is it is interesting. So, I have such a prejudiced mindset on this conversation because I too I'm boxed in by my military thinking, 30 years in there, and I feel I understand to my core servant leadership. I understand that principle. And I think there's a lot of people, just like how when you were doing your research, a lot of people are like, we practice servant leadership and all that kind of stuff. And then we just got done with employee engagement, which is really high employee engagement leading to the experience in which you've spoken about. Is there a third part to this, or is it these two things that are combined together create the magic of what you're basically trying to say?
No, there's actually more pieces to it. So, um, think about, um, there is something that connects those basic organizational resources of people, money, and knowledge with that overarching purpose of servant leadership, engagement, employee safety, collaboration, relationship, respect. And those what I call the connecting genes are, behaviors, and I would even say behaviors slash values and rules and routines. Every organization has rules, most of which are unwritten.
Yes.
Um, the example I use in the book is, one of my former, bosses. I was working for a small regional consulting firm for several years, and every morning the president would walk in the door of his office. He would close the interior blinds of his office. He would lock his door, and he would go about doing his business, his work. And at noon, he would unlock the door. He would raise the interior blinds of his office, and he'd go to lunch and come back. And then he was free to see people. Now, there was no rule that said don't bother David in the morning, but it was
Right.
pretty clear.
It
Don't
was,
don't bother David in the morning.
that's right.
Yeah. Um, and what these high performing organizations do though is they design their rules. So and they throw out rules that don't have any meaning to anybody, and they intentionally design some rules. So this furniture manufacturing company, they have one, and it's only one, overriding rule: machines serve people rather than people serve machines.
Mm.
So when I was talking to one of their senior leaders, he said he was working on a cutting machine, and they just bought a brand new one of these numerically controlled cutting machines that makes very, very precise cuts in their the framing for their furniture. But they realized after not too very long of using this new machine that it required extra steps of the people
Hmm.
operating the machine. They sold that machine.
Ha.
A- and I'm thinking, if I'm their accountant, I'm having a heart attack. but
That's true.
but the rule is the rule is machines serve people rather than the other way around. They had to sell that machine. When I'm talking to the 4-star general, I said, "So how does the Army reinforce servant leadership?" And he says, "Well, let me give you two examples. And one, I have to be a little bit delicate here, but he said when soldiers are out on maneuvers or they're on a mission, something has to be done with human waste. And maybe
Hmm.
you know where I'm going with this. He said the contents of the latrine, and at this point his language is getting very colorful. He
Yeah.
said the contents of that latrine are, gets dumped into 55-gallon barrels. Diesel fuel gets mixed in with it, and we burn it. He said, by rule, even the company commander has to take their turn stirring that stuff. He said nobody is exempt. He said another way is when a squad is going out on a helicopter, the highest ranking officer is the last one to board that helicopter and the
Yep.
first one to get off.
That's right.
And that is because the Army has a core value of selfless service, which they define as putting the welfare of the nation, the Army, and your subordinates above your own.
Amen to that.
So one way they execute that is the highest ranking officer is the last one to get on that helicopter and the first one to get off. And you know more than I do. That means they are they are putting themselves at harm's way first.
That's exactly right. Yeah, there's a book even written on that theory, right? Of leaders eat last.
Right,
Same exact
right,
theory.
right. Exact same thing. And but what Simon Sinek does in that book, in my opinion, and I love the book. I think where he fails is that he doesn't recognize or he doesn't mention that it is a hard and fast rule and routine in that case of the United States Marine Corps.
Yep.
And it's not an option. It's not a suggestion. It's not a good idea to follow through if you want to. A couple of years ago, I had a 20-year-old nephew come back after 13 weeks of Marine Corps boot camp. And so just to test the theory, I said, so is it true that, or I said, who eats last? Who goes through the cafeteria last? And, with great Marine Corps gusto, he said, the highest ranking officer.
That's right. Dan, it's kind of this is funny, but it is this shows you how ingrained that is as a military culture to this day. When we have supper at my home, and especially if we have guests, I will always be the last person to go through and get my dinner and all of those kind of things because it's just that ingrained fact of how you just should be last to do that.
Well, so take that, but take that at an organizational level. So let's say your organization is manufacturing widgets or furniture. Well, what rules and routines do you need to identify and have in place to support a culture of servant leadership? Now, it's probably not going to be going through the chow line in the cafeteria last, but it might be something like every time one of my subordinates says, I have an idea, I have to listen to that idea. And my job is to coach them through a process to determine whether or not that idea is workable, will save us money, will save us time, will save an expense. That's my job. I am to be their mentor, and I am trained and coached and expected to be a mentor. Um, so, just to even underscore the point, this manufacturing company, they practice Kaizen. I mean, it's call it lean if you want to. They just happen to call it Kaizen. They have a specific process that they've designed to do a Kaizen. And every leader, manager, production lead, whatever you want to call them, mentor, they know what that process is. And their job is to train and coach and mentor their subordinates, their staff, in how to do Kaizen. In fact, they want it so ingrained into everybody that works for their organization that they will give paid time off to anybody who conducts a Kaizen, whether it's for the company or whether it's for their personal home. Or in one case, I heard somebody even did a Kaizen on reorganizing their boat,
Nice.
and they got personal time off for it.
And they got time to be on the boat. So, Dan, what's the difference then? As you're now walking us through this, the behaviors, the values, kind of the rules, whether they're written or unwritten, you almost sound so push back on this. You almost sound like a culture person. You almost sound like a culture, like you're just explaining this is how the culture should be with the organization. What's the difference between a culture expert and what you're trying to push? Because those things, I would say, are encountered very much when you read a book about how to change the culture of a organization.
Well, so you've got 30 years in the military. Would you agree with the statement that Barry McCaffrey said to me? Leadership is everything, and everything is leadership.
Yes.
Okay. So at some point, culture has to be derived from leadership, because individual leaders can kill a culture faster than anything. So yes, you're right. I think we're really talking about a designed culture. But for a design culture to work, for it really to become an organizational culture, in my judgment, it has to begin with leadership, and every leader and manager knowing how to lead to a specific end, such as respect, relationship, safety, collaboration, love, and grace.
I love it because you know what you've just done too, Dan, is you've called out every lazy senior manager, senior executive. I'm afraid to use the word leader because they're not, right? Because what they're saying is this just fails because we have a crappy culture. This just fails because our culture isn't designed to support us to get across the finish line. You flip that on its head.
Well, actually, what you just said is true, because we haven't designed a culture. Um, and you're absolutely right. In fact, the word that I use in the book is this approach for some will be terrorizing, because the lazy leader, or the leader who prefers to really be a boss as opposed to a leader, it will scare the daylights out of them. Um, just a funny story. One of my first interviews was with a guy who he was retired, but he was the CEO of North Mississippi Health Services in Tupelo, Mississippi. He's the only guy to have taken three different organizations to the Malcolm Baldrige National Quality Award, which is the nation's highest honor for excellence, and he did it with three different organizations. And when I was talking to him and he's probably one of the few people that's actually intentionally said, "I need to design a system of leadership." And when he told me about how he did it at North Mississippi Health, um, I said, and they were a mess when he took over. I said, "So when you started rolling out this system, how did your leadership team respond?" And he kind of laughed. He said, "Well, half of them got up and walked out, And the other half were saying to themselves, I'm pretty sure that John's going to be getting up and walking out sooner or later. So I'll just stick around and wait him out.
Oh, okay. I've seen those games played before.
Yep.
Yep.
Yep. Yep.
So what at the end of the day, Dan, you've really uncovered for us to I've got a page of notes. I do, and it's one of those things. It's highlighted actually. I took a highlighter and wrote about that employee experience. It's about the experience of the employee that makes that difference. And then we kind of got into the systems and we got into the behaviors, the values, the rules, and how we flip that culture perspective on. And it just keeps coming back to leadership. It keeps coming back to that point, even if it's dehumanized in at the beginning of this conversation about, oh my gosh, systems theory, don't get too technical on me. It's about humans. It's still, it does boil down to humans, doesn't it? At the end, it is about accountability and about that word boss versus leader and what that means. It's the human.
Yep. 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 Well, so I believe that every organization has a system of leadership. It's either been it's either evolved over time, which means it looks like a one of those reality TV shows where everybody has been hoarding everything in their house, and it looks like the house is full of stuff that should have been thrown out 30 years ago, or it's intentionally designed. And high performing organizations, from my research, says they intentionally design their leadership, and they put accountability in there with it. So the guy I just mentioned, John Herr, who taken three different organizations to the nation's highest award for excellence. When asked him, I said, how do you really hold people accountable and to the principles, in his case, of servant leadership? And his response was, we measure every leader against the levels of engagement of their staff.
Ha.
He said we have certain parameters. As long as they're within, a certain tier, then they're fine. But he said if they fall below a certain threshold, we will hire at our expense. We hire coaches and mentors to go in and start working with those leaders on a one-on-one basis. He said also, instead of measuring them once a year, we measure them twice a year. And they are measured by a team of subordinates, peers, and supervisors. And part of the measurement, besides just levels of engagement of their staff, part of their measurement is how well they model core behaviors and values. And one of the big ahas was, and this was a huge aha. I found these organizations put as much, or if not more, emphasis on the personal behaviors of their leadership team as they do organizational values.
I love it. And I think almost if there's someone that is not in a leadership position that's listening to this podcast, they're standing up right now and applauding. They are standing up and going, "That's how I want my organization to operate." It's all about accountability.
Funny thing was, I found almost the exact same accountability system in another healthcare organization in Abilene, Texas, and they have received Gallup's. There's a new name for it now, but it's the Best Place to Work award. They've won that for 14 consecutive years. In fact, they've won it every year since Gallup has been recognizing these high performing organizations, um, and has been consistent every year. They win this thing, and they have some of the highest levels of workforce engagement in the country. Um, and if you think about it, you think, okay, well, why is that a big deal for a healthcare organization? Happens to be a big deal because the number one determinant of hospital mortality is the level of engagement of their nurses.
Okay, that's scary
Uh,
and enlightening at the same time.
yeah, exactly. And when you tie into the fact that hospitals, accidental deaths, avoidable deaths in hospitals, is one of the leading causes of death in America.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, I think everybody is going to be buying one of your books and sending it to their
To their
local
boss.
hospital. That was exactly right. So, Dan, I tell you, as we're coming up on the top of the hour, this has been a really cool journey. You talked about how 4 years to do this book, and I can see why, because it probably was almost insatiable for you that as you had an interview with an organization and you unpacked it, and then you went to another one, you started to connect these dots yourself. And then you were like, okay, it's almost detective work, right? And you finally uncovered this genius way to put it on pages to explain to us kind of the formula for this high performing organization levels. Fascinating stuff, Dan. That again, I think if I know a good chunk of our audience demographics, and if they are like me, I have like I said, this page and a half of notes that are really aha moments, but yet are points that taken on their own, you can say, okay, not necessarily an original thought on your own, like create rules for an organization. Well, every organization creates rules, have behaviors, look at resources. But when you look at the totality, when you combine them, and I love the fact of how you go, yeah, but leadership drives that culture and not the other way around. And we talk about the difference between bosses and leaders. All of that combined, then you go, I get it. Now I know what you're after, Dan.
Now you've just defined a system.
That's right. I thank you. We all thank you for the time that you've shared with us today. And we are definitely going to have a link for the book. It's already getting out there, and rave reviews. And I tell you, I'm going to go in there and just tear these pages apart with notes and everything. It's something that is going to be a part of my work environment to make me better myself. So, Dan, if you'd like to leave us with any final thoughts, I'd appreciate that.
Oh, no, I don't have any final thoughts other than maybe this. You think about 66% of the population goes to work every day, and they really don't care about their organization. They are bored with their work, and Gallup says that half of them at any one point in time are looking for a new job. Think about what would happen if throughout our organizations, those numbers were reversed, where 70% of the workforce got up in the morning, enjoyed going to work. They knew their voice would be heard. They knew they can contribute. They knew they can give the very best part of their humanity to the organization. What would that kind of a world look like?
Well, I want to be a part of that part of the world.
Yeah, me too.
There's no doubt about that. Dan, you've inspired us. You have really showed us what it really takes to kind of build that courageous workforce, to have the right focus. And again, thank you for spending this time with the tribe. We're all better for it by listening to your words today.
Well,
thanks again.
Thank you, Jim. I appreciate it.
Thanks for joining our leadership movement this week. Talking to Dan today reminded me that traditional books on leadership strive to create courageous leaders who will attract followers. Leveraging the genetics of leadership, though, will show you how to create a courageous workforce who will attract customers. Truly eye-opening, Dan. Thanks again for the conversation. And don't forget that our show notes are posted on the website with key leader takeaways. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast and tell a friend so we can continue to build this tribe. Until next time, remember that iron sharpens iron. Make yourself and others around you better every single day.